Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for a briefing on PennDOT Pathways draft planning and environmental linkages study. We will be taking questions throughout the presentation. You can submit them underneath the viewing window, and we'll take as many as we can on this topic after the presentation today. We are recording and we'll share the link afterward, and we will also pursue answers for any questions that we don't get to during the session today. This morning we have presenting to you Deputy Secretary for Planning Larry Shiflett and Alternative Funding Program Director Ken McLean. So again, we will be recording. We are going to send the link after the presentation, and we will answer any questions after the fact that we don't get to today. With that, Deputy Secretary Shiflett, go ahead and kick us off.
Thanks so much, Erin, and good morning to everybody. Just before we really get into the meat of this, I want to take a 10-second advertisement to say thanks to everyone for joining. Looks like we have good numbers of participants this morning, and I know late notice on scheduling this, but again, it's an important topic for all of us, and again, greatly appreciate everyone just adjusting their calendars and schedules to join in and listen today and have some interaction as well at the end. So we've been through this before, but obviously despite rising traffic and freight travel in our state, the funds available to maintain our transportation system have not kept pace with our needs. This is due to the eroding value of the gas tax and the uncertainty in future funding. Our investment needs are outgrowing our current funding, and this gap gets worse every year. That's why we launched PennDOT Pathways. Through this program, we'll analyze new future-focused sources of funding for our transportation system that could better serve our communities and all Pennsylvanians for decades to come. PennDOT is responsible for supporting every mode of transportation in the state, from roads and bridges to ports and bicycle lanes. But one of our major needs right now is on our highway and bridge program. So let's break down how we fund our highways and bridges. There are some revenues collected, as you can see here, from licensing, general funds, and the federal government, but our largest source of revenue comes from state and federal gas taxes, which make up a combined 74%. We are extraordinarily dependent on the gas tax. These funds are generated every time a driver in Pennsylvania refills their car's gas tank. Gas taxes have become a less predictable source of revenue for transportation agencies across the country, not just in Pennsylvania. As passenger vehicles become more fuel efficient and all electric vehicle technology continues to evolve, we are seeing reduced revenues at the gas pump. In fact, auto manufacturers are in overdrive to push electric vehicles to market and plan on spending $225+ billion in developing new electric vehicles. In January of 2021, General Motors announced that they will go all electric by 2035, and this will continue to be a trend throughout the industry. In addition to passenger cars, trucks are moving toward electronic technologies as well. Some segments of the trucking industry, such as vans and box trucks, are also looking at this, which all combined is making our revenue challenges worse. The challenge is not unique to Pennsylvania, though. In this chart, the green line indicates annual gallons of gas consumed per vehicle. You can see that from 1993 to 2019, there's been about a 6% decrease. When we look at the blue line, which indicates the purchasing power of a dollar, we can see that there's been more than a 40% decrease from 1993 to 2019. This means that our entire nation's decreasing dependency on gas, in combination with a lack of adjustment for inflation, means that the revenue we generate from the gas tax is quickly becoming a less and less reliable source of funding for all. Today, our current highway and bridge funding need is $15 billion annually, but our budget is only $6.9 billion. Put simply, we have investment needs that far exceed our current funding, and this deficit gets worse every year that passes. As shown here, today we have an annual highway and bridge funding gap of $8.1 billion, but over the next 10 years, this highway and bridge funding gap is projected to grow to $12.6 billion annually. This chart probably looks somewhat familiar. While much needed and a good step forward, Act 89 of 2013 did not meet the need that was identified by the Transportation Funding Advisory Commission in 2011. Also, the commission assumed federal action would occur, so needs on federally assisted assets were largely left out of this number. As of 2020, our unmet transportation needs continue to grow well beyond the $2.4 billion that was generated by Act 89. And just so folks know, this is a slide that's a snapshot of in time, dating back to 2012. Allowing the funding gap to grow is no longer an option. Failing to take action would mean several things. First, increased repair costs. Delaying repair work would lead to additional costs in the future, with the compounding effects of aging bridges, increased demand, and increasing construction costs. Second, poor road conditions. Being able to effectively complete repairs would lead road pavement to deteriorate, resulting in higher vehicle maintenance costs for all of us. Third, rising congestion. Lack of adequate funding could delay capacity improvement projects that may otherwise ease that congestion. And lastly, wasted fuel costs. Congestion, often due to temporary road closures and repairs, leads to $348 million in wasted fuel costs per year across the state of Pennsylvania. We need to find near and long-term options for funding for a secure tomorrow. Our alternate funding office was established in October of 2020, and our work on PennDOT Pathways began in earnest in November of 2020, when we launched the program and introduced opportunities for public feedback. Since we launched Pathways, we've opened multiple channels of communication with the public. Between our email, web comment forms, and hotline, we've received over 4,000 comments. We've also received 4,000 responses to our initial baseline survey, over 110,000 visits to our PennDOT Pathways website. We've held 2 equity and tolling working group sessions, and had over 300 responses to our environmental justice focused Pathways survey. At this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Ken to run us through the rest. Thanks, Ken.
Hey, thank you very much, Larry, and thanks to everybody for spending an hour out of your important day to learn a little bit more about Pathways and receive this update on the program that we're pursuing moving forward. So what is PennDOT Pathways? So PennDOT Pathways is pretty much just our brand name to look at alternative funding options in the state of Pennsylvania as we move forward. Larry did a very good job of covering exactly what our needs are and how our shrinking revenues are impacting our operations and our programs. So, you know, we looked out across the country and we looked at different states that were implementing some of these ideas, and we're planning to bring them here to Pennsylvania for the first time. So, you know, as part of the Pathways program, we launched what's called a planning and environmental linkages study. So it's pretty much the first time that PennDOT has endeavored down the road of looking at creating what's called a PEL in short. There are many other states, and the FHWA has done this before for other similar programs, so we decided that it would be a very useful planning tool for us moving forward. So we're going to educate you a little bit more about what is a PEL, and then some of the short, mid, and long-term solutions that we're going to be looking at in the PEL. So if you look at the chart that's in front of you, you'll see in the middle there are a total of 4 mid and long-term solutions, which we really haven't begun looking at yet in earnest, and that's why the arrows lead over to them being future initiatives. Then we have 2 potential near-term solutions that we're looking at, one of which is the Major Bridge P3 program, which we launched and received approval from the P3 board on November 12th of 2020. And you'll see that's a short-term one, and that leads over to the green box. And then there's another one that we're going to be looking at here in the future, and it's called managed lanes. So I do have slides that show exactly what the definition for each of these categories are. But here, this just pretty much explains what is in the PEL as far as potential future alternative funding strategies. The PEL is a programmatic document, kind of like a playbook on how we're going to go through the process and what processes we're going to use moving forward to analyze these different types of alternative funding solutions. Each one of these options, depending on how they matriculate moving forward, will obviously require NEPA approvals for any projects that come out of them. So I'll go in some subsequent slides will explain kind of where the PEL is in the process, but I just wanted to get that out there on what the PEL is. It's not really the regulatory environmental approval process associated with any project that goes through project delivery. But the PEL, since it is a planning document and it's going to be our roadmap into the future, it will be made available to the Transportation Revenue Options Commission that the governor stood up to look at reframing, funding in Pennsylvania moving forward and to reduce our reliance on the gas taxes. Next slide, please. So basically, what is a PEL? So, this group is very familiar with the PennDOT project development process. So you'll understand this greater than most audiences that I talk to. So if you look, it's just a circular process. Typically, and this kind of mimics the phases that you'll see that go on to the tip. So, the planning process in general, we may do plans or a planning or study phase for a project, which is phase 1, and they may be funded for individual projects. But, looking at the 12-year program, the long range plan and the tips, that is the planning process to start getting projects programmed to move forward into the future. So, once a project is, planned and programmed onto the tip, it then moves over into the NEPA stage. You can substitute preliminary engineering here for NEPA. NEPA obviously stands for National Environmental Policy Act. It's line and grade, and it's some of the preliminary engineering, and then it moves on to look at all of the NEPA studies that are typically required for a project. The PEL, you can see, is kind of the intersection of those two. It's, late in the planning phase, early in the NEPA phase, and it just sets that groundwork and framework for what we're going to look at, which will give us a jump on how to attack preliminary engineering activities for any of these options moving forward. Obviously you just continue clockwise through the project development process. Then coming out of environmental, you can then proceed with final design, design field view, you get your NEPA clearance, you can then start to acquire right-of-way that would be required for the project. In final design, you're pretty much developing a PS&E, which stands for plans, specifications, and estimates. You then put them out to the construction community to bid on. They then go ahead and build it. Then PennDOT, inspects it, assumes ownership responsibility of the end product, and then we begin to maintain it. You've seen that we've done more robust preventative maintenance scopes into the future. There are rehabilitations over the life cycle of a project, but with any asset that we own and maintain, you eventually come to a point where it exceeds its useful life cycle. And then the process starts again. You start to plan for what you're going to do into the future. So for the Major Bridge P3 initiative, we've hit that. The bridges that we're talking about, the 9 candidate bridges, have gone through their life cycle. We've done several rehabilitations to them. They're typically 60, 65 years of age. They're coming to the end of their life cycle. They need work. You know, as you do maintenance far on into the life cycle of any asset, you get less of a return on investment. They become more complex of a repair. They don't last as long, and you start to get to a point where you're throwing, you know, good money after bad, so to speak. So, you know, that process would start all over again. So that enters where we're at right now. We've gone through this life cycle. Now we're starting planning, and we're looking at alternative funding strategies as an alternate way to create revenues in Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. All right, so Pathways and the Transportation Options Commission, also known as the TROCK. So how are the Pathways PEL study and the TROCK linked, you might ask yourself? You know, the Pathways PEL study is a planning document, like I stated. So it will act as a resource for the TROCK as they work to identify which long-term funding options will best eliminate our state's reliance on gas tax. You know, the PEL identifies potential near-term, potential long-term funding options that could be implemented, and it lays out a proposed path for moving our transportation funding forward. You know, as new information and data are collected and obtained, the PEL can be updated over time. You know, down the road, developments with the TROCK could be incorporated into an updated PEL. So in a certain sense, the PEL will continue to act as a living document as market, you know, forces change in the transportation industry. And you've seen that happening, as Larry suggested, with, you know, the movement to electric vehicles. I mean, it's something that really is impacting the way we're doing business today. So talking about the PEL in general, so, you know, in developing the PEL study, it was clear that each potential funding option that we're going to be looking at came with its own opportunities and challenges, just like anything else. We've evaluated the following factors when assessing each of these potential funding options. You know, so firstly, you know, the revenue potential for each of these potential solutions moving forward. You know, will it be able to generate revenue enough to pay for itself, and in some cases even generate a little bit of excess revenue to expand our transportation programs? Secondly, what are the required approvals or authorities necessary to implement these different strategies moving forward? Thirdly, implementation timeline. So I talked about that a little bit. You have near-term, short-term, and long-term solutions. So in the near term, we kind of looked at any of these options that could potentially be implemented or appreciably implemented within a 2 to 4 year time frame. You know, when you get to midterm, that could be anywhere between like 3 and 8 years or 3 and 7 years. And then long-term options were pretty much 7 years plus. You know, they're the more complicated ones. There's a lot of policy that has to be done, you know, a lot of public engagement, could be enabling legislation that you would have to do. The scopes of those types of projects are much grander. They could be statewide, and there's just a lot more effort in the implementation. And then lastly, any impacts to the public, specifically low-income groups, minority populations, as well as other stakeholders. So we evaluated these various factors and identified the most promising options which could be implemented in the near term versus those which would require much longer term coordination. So the PEL study structure. So I mean, this graphic here, just the major components of the PEL and what it looks like. You know, so firstly, we have a section in the PEL that talks about the background. It's the exact information that Larry presented to you with this presentation today. It establishes what are our current transportation needs for highways and bridges and potentially even into some of the transit and multimodal areas. Once you identify what the needs are, you could identify the funding gaps, and then you start looking at the funding options that could potentially close those gaps. So that's moving over in a clockwise fashion to funding options. So what are these potential options that could help us close those gaps? Next, lower left-hand side, identification of methodology for addressing environmental effects on low-income and minority populations. So with many of these efforts, they could incorporate either tolls or user fees. This is the first time that PennDOT is doing implementation of tolls and user fees, and it comes with a different set of rules. So we have to do normal, NEPA analysis on any transportation project that we pursue. But when you start implementing user fees, you have to go that extra mile with some additional studies, toll diversion analysis and impacts to those diversions. You have to look specifically at environmental justice, because now, there's an economic component to this. People have to pay the toll. What are going to be the impacts to specific demographics of Pennsylvanians? So, it goes a little bit deeper than your normal project development process that we would follow during a normal program. And then lastly, the lower right-hand side, public and agency outreach. What do we have to do? Who do we have to talk to? What approvals do we have to get? We've spent a lot of time so far working with the Federal Highway Administration, working with the EPA. We've established, as Larry mentioned early, equity groups, and we've had 2 workshops with equity groups so far. You hear coming out of the Biden administration that equity is going to be a major portion of what's coming out of potentially any investment in infrastructure moving forward. So we're paying particular attention to equity. We're reaching out to those groups and we're asking them, hey, what groups that you cover and represent are present in some of these areas? How can we reach out to them? There's an old saying out there that says that if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu, right? So we want to avoid that from happening. We want to be able to give people a voice, and we want to be able to collect, their input. So the equity group, there's been 2 workshops so far. They've been fantastic. We've gotten some really, really good feedback that's going to be extremely beneficial moving forward. So moving on to potential funding options, as I said before, near term, we're looking at bridge tolling and managed lanes. Medium to long term, congestion pricing, corridor tollage, easy for me to say, corridor tolling, mileage-based user fees, and then fee and tax increases. And I do have slides to talk about each one of them moving forward. Next slide, please. So bridge tolling, this is the option that we're pursuing under the Major Bridge P3 initiative that you've been hearing a lot about most recently in the press. This solution would involve tolling major bridge replacements or extensive rehabilitation projects as a means of funding these very expensive projects. By major bridges, we mean structures that are costly to replace and have the potential for substantial disruption of traffic patterns due to potential, closures in the future or restrictions. We don't want to sound alarm bells that these things are going to fall down or they could be closed or restricted, but there are case examples of where that's happened in the past. There was an interstate bridge that was closed in Rhode Island, and people had to take, very circuitous routes around through many communities to circumvent that. You look at I-95 right in Pennsylvania in District 6 a couple years ago, there was a tire fire, which put it out. Now, it wasn't natural. There was a crack in a pier on an interstate on 95. 495 in Delaware had the piers that started to rotate on 495. So these things can happen. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to happen in this case, but they can. Tolls collected would be used for funding the replacement and maintenance of these bridges. So why are we considering it? So, drivers that use the bridge pay for the bridge. It's that simple, including out-of-state travelers, which may or may not contribute to our existing, coffers for the motor license fund today. If they fill up in Pennsylvania, great, then they do contribute something through gas taxes. If they don't, they may not be, contributing anything. So authority exists through 23 USC 129 for states to toll bridges as a means for paying for replacement or rehabilitation. Pennsylvania state law requires that tolling use a public-private partnership, and we received approval from the Pennsylvania P3 board on November 12th of 2020. Because legal or legislative action is not required, bridge tolling can be implemented more quickly than some of the other alternative funding options that I talked about. There are 137 toll bridges in the country, so tolling is a proven means of funding major bridge replacement work. So how would it work? All of you are aware that on February 18, we announced 9 candidate bridge project locations. They're beginning to proceed through the environmental review processes. They have to go through all of those NEPA analysis. They have to go through the diversion route analysis. They have to go through all of the environmental justice analyses that are required for these projects. One of the big misnomers about this program is that all of this stuff was done, we announced these bridges, and we weren't very transparent. It couldn't be more contrary. We're doing those studies right now, and as those studies progress, we will be, looping in the MPOs and the communities and the legislators with exactly what the findings are of those studies. So, if you want to learn more about those specific projects, you can visit our website, PennDOT.gov/funding, and I'm not sure if that's a backslash or a /. I'm not very good at that. The next option we're looking at is managed lanes. You may have heard about this before. It is a near-term solution because we may be able to implement it a little bit faster than some of the others. To be very clear, we haven't started work on managed lanes at all. We haven't even advertised for our consultant assistance for this yet, but it is an option that once we do pursue that, it may be able to be implemented sooner rather than some of the other options I'll be talking about. So what is a managed lane? It's when you add lanes to a highway where traffic is regulated by charging a toll to those new lanes only, or by encouraging carpooling or high occupancy vehicle lanes. Typically can be used, free of charge. This option offers a choice to drivers. So that's the difference between major bridge tolling. To pay a fee to use the managed lanes, carpool could use it for free, or they can choose to use, the regular capacity that existed before the expansion, free of charge. So why are we considering this option? So drivers use managed lanes typically to receive a consistent, reliable travel time, and it gives drivers a choice. The added capacity of the managed lanes can also result in better flow in the general purpose lanes. So if more people jump out of the original capacity, pay for the new capacity, that frees up some capacity on the free lanes as well. How would implementation work? So managed lanes, they work best in corridors with recurring peak period congestion. So that is, traditionally, it doesn't necessarily have to be, specific to urban areas. It could be some rural areas, but any road, and we're talking about an expressway or an interstate here, that would have consistent, repeatable congestion. So typically that happens in your morning and afternoon rush hours, but it could be any time of the day. In selecting managed lanes candidates, we would consider factors such as connectivity to the network, congestion levels, and travel times. Next slide, please. Congestion pricing. So congestion pricing, we feel, is potentially a midterm solution. So that might be between, a 4 to 6 year period, 4 to 8 year period. It's a form of tolling where all drivers driving in a specific zone or corridor are charged variable fees based on how many cars are on the roadway. So you could do a variable toll rate like some of the other states do, where higher fees are charged during, more congested time periods. Tolls would be on existing lanes without adding any new capacity. Drivers are encouraged to carpool. After the time of their travel, they can, be encouraged to use transit or alternate routes. So basically what I'm saying here is congestion pricing is intended to affect driver behavior and patterns. So if during congested periods, you'd hope that they would either seek alternate routes, use transit, carpool together, or start traveling during off-peak times when there's more capacity available on the highway. So why are we considering it? Congestion pricing can lead to less congested urban centers, meaning better air quality and more reliable travel times. How would we implement it? That's congestion pricing would be considered in urban areas where roadway congestion is a consistent problem. And many of you on the phone could probably think of a dozen different, potential candidates, across the state, but, this is more so an urban issue. This funding option would require an application and acceptance into the value pricing pilot program, which some people refer to it as VPPP. It's a federal pilot program for implementation. Next, corridor tolling. All right, so corridor tolling, a long-term solution that would be studied. This could involve tolling of interstates and expressways based on the distance traveled along the road. So all lanes within the corridor would be tolled, and that would help to pay for the reconstruction or rehabilitation of that roadway. You look at the turnpike today, that's an example of corridor tolling. You know, people get on at one exit, they get off at another exit, they're charged a commensurate toll for the distance that they travel on that roadway. This would be something similar. So with corridor tolling, only those that use that facility, that interstate or expressway, would pay for it. It wouldn't be like a tax where, you know, somebody would have to pay their share toward it regardless of whether or not they're using that highway or not. And that's what happens with the gas taxes. You know, if we invested on a certain road, gas taxes are charged to everybody who travels, and that money could be spent on a different road that they may not even use. So how would implementation work? Corridor tolling would be considered on interstates and expressways only, and they could be implemented by leveraging existing tolling technology and infrastructure. Tolling of expressways for reconstruction or rehabilitation of that roadway would require approval by the Pennsylvania P3 board if that was the financing mechanism that is chosen for it. So we do have the enabling legislation in place in the Pennsylvania P3 board. If we were to decide to use some other form of financing, such as bonding, obviously PennDOT itself doesn't have bonding authority. It's the Commonwealth or the legislature, but then we also don't have tolling authority outside of the P3 program. So that's the nuance there. So interstate tolling would require P3 approval as well as acceptance into the federal interstate reconstruction and rehabilitation pilot program. That's a mouthful. The acronym for that, and I don't know if you're ever going to remember it because I don't, is ISRRPP. Stands for Interstate System Reconstruction and Rehabilitation Pilot Program. Tolling interstates and expressways, especially with a desired system-wide approach, would require extensive planning, extensive environmental justice evaluation. None of this has been undertaken thus far. You know, there's been no application to the ISRRPP, and it's a 6+ year. That's why we're saying it's a long-term potential solution. Next, I would like to talk about MBUFs. So everybody has heard the recent conversations coming from the federal government, even from the state legislature in Pennsylvania. We're talking about MBUFs. So just to let everybody know, MBUF stands for Mileage-Based User Fee. The western states in the country refer to it as a RUC, R-U-C, which stands for Road User Charge, and others may have referred to this very same option as a VMT, or a Vehicle Miles Traveled. So they're all synonymous with one another, just in case, you know, somebody asks you what's a RUC, a VMT, MBUF, they're all pretty much the same thing. So they're a little different from tolls in that they're usually tied to odometer readings or other distance-based technologies. Other distance-based technologies, what are those? That could be some sort of GPS device. It could be onboard telematics in new cars. And all of those devices would determine the number of miles that are driven within a certain time frame. You know, we haven't even begun to pilot this. We haven't looked at what the policy would be for it, but you'd have to look at, you know, would it be an annual charge to a driver? Would it be a quarterly charge? How would we collect the mileage? We don't know. Different states have implemented pilots across the country. We're paying very close attention to them, specifically Oregon and Utah. And we're looking to see how they work there. I believe one of them forces EVs to opt into it so that they pay their fair share. I think the other one is a voluntary program with a cap. So it's a voluntary program that once you hit a certain threshold, you don't have to pay anything above and beyond that. So we've gone through now and completed our third round of a study with the Eastern Transportation Coalition, looking at, you know, what MBUFs could look like in Pennsylvania. They're collecting a lot of data. They're engaging with different industry partners, such as the trucking community, to talk about how, you know, equity would work. One of the knocks on this idea is that, you know, rural travelers typically travel a little bit further to get to where they're going, so that may make it, you know, a bigger burden on them. So those are the types of things that we need to look at moving forward. But Delaware, Washington State, Oregon, California, and Colorado have all looked at, you know, significant implementations of MBUFs. So mileage-based user fees would require establishing a new statewide program, and we would also need enabling legislation to implement this, which is currently not in place, obviously. The TROCK is going to be having a presentation on MBUFs moving forward, so that's gonna gain a little momentum in the TROCK. So it'll be interesting to see what the stakeholders and the commissioners on that commission think about MBUF, and that could help to frame what we do in the future as far as looking at an eventual pilot. Fee and tax increases, that's the last one. That's a catch-all, right? And this one lives in perpetuity. You know, you could argue that, you know, Act 89 was various fees and tax increases. You know, potentially some of the options coming out of whatever the TROCK comes up with could be tax and fee increases. You know, Pennsylvania is heavily reliant, as Larry stated, 74% on gas taxes for highways and bridges in Pennsylvania. Other states use personal income taxes, they use property taxes, and that's why the gas taxes vary from state to state, because other states augment it with other types of funding, which we obviously don't do a lot of since we're 74%. There was a study in a meeting that I was in earlier in the week that said that we are one of the more reliant states on gas taxes, like in the top 5 in the country. Next slide, please. So funding option implementation. So after securing P3 board approval, if applicable, how would any of these funding options beyond just bridge tolling be implemented? So the first step would be to identify the specific project that will utilize the funding option and its feasibility as a candidate for the funding option. So for example, a specific expressway where a managed lane could alleviate congestion through new lanes, or a corridor that needs reconstruction or rehabilitation. So, you know, do we have candidates? Start to identify specific corridors as part of any one of these ideas. That's the first step. Once they're identified, and we did that through the major bridge P3 portion already. You know, once we did that, then the project would be a project, and it would have to go through all of the necessary environmental reviews, NEPA, natural cultural resources, community engagement. I did mention the EJ component, the diversion route analysis, that whole component. That all has to happen on every one of these projects moving forward. And that is what we're doing right now on the major bridge P3 initiative. That's the stage we're in. And then we were trying to identify, you know, what are the opportunities for public input and through the environmental review process. So we have a pretty sound way of doing that in a non-COVID environment, pre-pandemic, a pretty strict way that we handle that through the Federal Highway Administration. You know, these options are going to be a little bit different, and the PEL is going to help us to identify what those processes are moving forward. Next slide, please. I talked a little bit about environmental justice. Because tolling is so unique, you know, we are going to have to look at above and beyond our normal NEPA processes, particularly diversion impacts. Various effects can occur in local communities from vehicles avoiding the toll by using alternate routes. The extra traffic on diversion routes may result in congestion on these routes if they don't have sufficient capacity to handle the added traffic. So we have to identify what is the likelihood for diversion, what are those diversion routes, and what are the impacts of diversion. And then we have to try to mitigate those impacts. Secondly, financial impacts. The financial impact of paying a toll or managing a toll payment account can create burdens, particularly for low-income populations. And we will be working through, you know, identifying where those low-income populations are, where the minority, you know, populations are in relation to these various projects, trying to quantify what the impacts to those populations are, and then mitigating those impacts. It sounds easy. It's going to be difficult, but that's what we're charged with doing. You know, should disproportionate and adverse effects on minority and low-income populations be determined through the environmental review process, you know, potential mitigations will be studied. Next. So what are the next steps for the PEL moving forward? So we've completed the draft PEL study, and we're putting it out for public and stakeholder comment. So we went through the first round of public comment between November and December of last year. This is the second and final round of public comment for the PEL. And it's going to be published between April 29th and June 1st. It is for the PEL. It's high-level comments that we're soliciting. So once we get all of that feedback, from citizens of Pennsylvania, planning organizations, stakeholders, whomever. We will incorporate those comments into the PEL. Summer of 2021, incorporate those, get it ready, get it over to the Federal Highway Administration, and then hopefully it'll be accepted at that point, that it'll be a good, sound planning document. And then fall, winter of 2021, we can then start to do the evaluation of these various programs that I'm talking about. So we received just anecdotally 4,000 comments through our hotline, email, and web comments form since November. And we're collecting additional public comment, starting today, as a matter of fact, for the second round. So it has been a very successful engagement as far as public feedback goes. So now you ask yourself, how do you present your feedback? How are we collecting it? So you can see, once again, April 29th till June 1st. Virtual public meeting is on our webpage, PennDOT.gov/funding. People can go out there, they can view all the information that's available. There is a ton of information out there. It's good, sound, educational components to it. They can educate themselves on every component to what I presented today. Then they can provide comments via the website, email address, and hotline. And I think the hotline, it may seem antiquated to some, but not everybody has the benefit of having broadband access in their neighborhood or a laptop computer. But through the website or email, you can do it through a smartphone, and then you can also use the smartphone to dial the hotline or a landline for as far as that matters. So people they're encouraged to submit as much information as possible. If in fact, I want to draw this distinction, the PEL outreach, it's a planning study. NEPA, for the 9 candidate bridges that are ongoing for the major P3 initiative, is different. So we have to respond to both. So if somebody gets confused and they start submitting candidate bridge specific comments on bridge tolling under the PEL document, we'll make sure that we document it in both places. So we will replicate that comment over specifically to the 9 candidate potential bridge P3 tolling projects, and it'll be documented both places. So that's the proper way to do it, so that we're making sure that that we're going through the necessary NEPA process for those. And that concludes my part of the presentation, and I'll turn it back over to Aaron Waters, Trissot, to close us out.
Thanks, Ken and Larry. We have a couple of questions before we close out today. One question is, would these funding options support funding for public transportation as well?
So that's a really good question, Aaron. Great question out there. So as any congestion pricing, for one, was one that I specifically mentioned, we were trying to encourage people to find alternate routes to free up capacity on that highway. So that's one in particular, that those toll revenues could help to fund additional transit routes and expand transit service in the area, because I come from southeastern PA as the former district executive in District 6. The roads, there are a lot of congestion in southeastern PA, but could you imagine what it would look like if SEPTA didn't exist? So that's a classic example of where we would try to get somebody off the Schuylkill Expressway, so to speak, and get them on the transit to be able to free up capacity. And with those toll dollars, we can support investment in transit to accomplish just that. So for some of these moving forward, there could be a transit component. Even for the major bridge P3 initiative that we're looking at right now, if it shows that transit could be an effective mitigation strategy, for that project, there can be money spent to mitigate diversions and impacts to low income through transit. And we're going through those studies to identify transit routes, and obviously, transit's more prevalent in urban areas than rural areas, but there's transit in all counties in Pennsylvania. So Short answer is yes. So hopefully I answered that question.
All right, thank you. And we have one more question. I'm going to put back up our feedback information so you can see where you and your stakeholder groups can find the information and submit feedback starting today. So our final question today is, have you looked at revenue neutral funding and identified what bridges we would close without additional revenue? So in other words, the bridges identified for tolling, when would they have to be closed without more funding?
We haven't gone through that step. We're trying to avoid like a crisis mentality, or trying to get people to think that, oh, the sky is falling. And I know that's been done in the past with PennDOT, and that's something that the secretary, didn't want to do here. One of the things we're going to be looking at moving forward is, once we get our detailed financial analyses completed, and I'm talking about net revenue calculations, we'll get a better understanding of the projected excess revenues that get created from the program. And then we can work with the planning partners to identify potential projects that could spin off of this. And some of them could be, the mitigation projects for diversions. Others could be just other problems in the immediate area that need to be addressed, whether they're linked to tolling or not. So, that's going to be a step we're going to be going forward with shortly. But, we have to come up with a better projection, and we're refining our estimates. But we didn't want to say, hey, if we don't invest this many dollars right now, here's the bridge that's going to be closed, or here's the bridge that's going to be posted. The reality is we inspect our bridges every 2 years, federally mandated. Some bridges require us to inspect them more frequently if there's issues or problems with them. Like, for example, the 2 bridges in District 10 that are on this program, they have fatigue cracks. They're fracture critical bridges. And what I mean by that is there's 2 girders that hold up the bridge. If one of them fails, the bridge collapses. We don't design bridges like that today anymore. We design them with what's called redundancy. So there's many different bridge beams that will hold it, so that if there's a problem with one beam, the bridge still stands. But the reality is, at any time, based on the age and condition of these bridges, we can go out and do a bridge inspection, and it could show a significant problem, and it could either be posted or closed tomorrow. That's the reality of it. You just don't know how some of these bridges are gonna react, and that's why we increase the frequency of inspections on bridges that have problems. I will say that something like the South Bridge, for example, in the last 5 years, we spent over $1.6 million doing rehabs to that bridge just on emergency repairs, expansion dam repairs, fatigue cracks, and arresting those cracks underneath the bridge structure. So there's been a significant amount of investment on a bridge like that. Plus, this summer, we're expecting another $1 million of emergency repairs to that structure based on inspections that we've already done. So that comes up to a number of $2.6 million being invested in that bridge. Something has to be done, right? So, if a subsequent inspection were to be done on that bridge and find a major flaw, you could end up posting that bridge in a direction, or God forbid, closing it. But that's what I want to say. But we haven't taken the step of saying this bridge could be closed, that bridge could be closed. That's a little heavy-handed. We're hoping that people would just understand, where we're coming from with this without having to go to such drastic measures.
Yeah, and Aaron, if I could add to that for just a minute, there's a lot going on, both at the state level, the federal level, in regards to infrastructure funding. So it definitely would be a little bit premature to, as Ken said, to take such drastic measures. The president has introduced his jobs bill about a month ago. Certainly some money proposed in that. We'll see what happens there. There's the reauthorization of the federal transportation bill, the FAST Act reauthorization, which may include some additional funding as well. And then we have the work through what we talked about today, Pathways, as well as what may come out of the Revenue Options Commission. So again, we're hopeful with all those different efforts underway that the conversation leads to some real solutions and resolution to our current funding issues.
Yeah, Larry, that's a great point. And I just want to add one more thing. So, Larry talked about our annual funding gap right now of being $8.1 billion per year. So, whatever the federal government comes up with as far as investment in infrastructure, that's going to be one thing. Whatever the TROCK comes up with is going to be another thing. Alternative funding is going to be a third thing. There was a round of stimulus that came into the state for $7.2 billion under the last COVID relief plan, none of which was earmarked specifically for highways or bridges, but the General Assembly could decide to put some there. If they do, our message is it's going to take all 3 or 4 of those options to close that gap. A federal solution isn't going to close it in its entirety. Anything coming out of the TROCK isn't going to close it in its entirety. Alternative funding isn't going to close it in its entirety. You need to put together a sound multi-pronged strategy for addressing it. And when you put them all together, that's going to generate the levels of revenue we need to appreciably close that gap. And that's my parting shot, Aaron, for the day. And hopefully, that's the resonating message that comes out of this.
All right, thank you both very much for your time. Thank you for everyone who joined us today. That concludes our presentation. Again, we will share the recording when it's prepared. And please do go out and check out the PEL study and provide your feedback. Thank you very much.